Thank you very much for the introduction. Dear Rector, dear Dean, dear colleagues, friends, and family, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to give this talk today and a nice opportunity for me to present my research topic to all of you. First, I would like to thank all the people who have organized this day and who make this day so special for us. So to start with, let me remind us of the importance of soil for our lives. So soil provides a lot of functions and services that we all depend on. It's just a very thin layer on the earth, but it's very important. We grow our food on it. The soil purifies water that we drink. It stores water. There's a fantastic density and diversity of soil organisms. So basically in a handful of soil, we have thousands of species. Soil also acts as, or it regulates biogeochemical cycles. We can use soil as building material or to build on it. So it's really a fantastic material. It's also fantastically complicated, which makes our lives a little bit more difficult, but also more exciting. I like very much the idea to use Lego to build the soil, which could be a way actually to engage our children early on with the soil. So in fact, in school they learn a lot maybe about the space, but they hardly know what's beneath our feet. So let's have a look what we can see beneath our feet. This is a photo from a soil profile. Maybe we don't see very much. It's just maybe something like 4 shades of brown. But you can see a certain layering, which indicates some kind of a structure. And we can take a little bit of soil, and we start to see what we like to call aggregates of different size and shapes. We see pores, we see roots growing in the soil, and we can see animals. So it's very much also a living material. And this geometrical arrangement of pores and solid particles, that's what we like to call the soil structure. Now, this only gives you the form, but structure also has another important property, and that's the stability or the strength. So, for example, if you want to build a house, you want it to look nice and it should be cozy to live in, it should function well, but you also would like the house to survive a major rainstorm or a wind, and it's a bit the same with the soil. Just for a soil, you would have somebody driving on your roof every now and then as well. So what we see here is it's one soil, but in one case it has been compacted, in another case not. I guess you can easily see which one is the compacted soil. I mean, we can still live in this soil, but I think this guy has a bit of hard life, so probably would prefer to live in here. What we see down here is a pore structure that we have visualized with help of computer tomography. Again, it's 2 examples from one soil, and one of them has been compacted and the other one not. So now, if we think that we would like to transport water or air through the soil, we could easily see that it goes better here. Also, if I am a root, I would probably like to live here because I could just use pre-existing pores, channels, to grow through the soil without using too much energy. And I could maybe get to the subsoil where I have some water. Whereas here, I would need to push away the soil myself, and maybe after a while I would get stuck because the soil has dried out as we approach summer. So the soil structure controls many of the functions in the soil, and it forms the living habitat for many animals. Now, what I like to do in my research, and well, the first one, understanding how soil structure is shaped, that's maybe more of a dream than actually a research objective, because it's probably far too complicated. But we would like to characterize the soil structure first and maybe develop some metrics so that we can answer a question, what is actually a good soil structure? We would like to quantify effects of soil management and also compaction on soil structure. Would like to link structure to function, which is very important. And we would like to see what kind of processes have, what's the relative contribution of different processes in the shaping and dynamics of soil structure. And of course we do all this because we think it's fun and interesting, but also we would like to help farmers maybe on how to manage their soil. So I like to come back a bit to the Lego bricks. I knew my children are here today and I thought they might like it. And it's also nice for grown-ups, actually. It also reflects a little bit that the soil is so complicated that in fact sometimes we have to do very simple experiments in order to understand something. So this, of course, is a terribly boring set of Legos, just a number of bricks, but let's see what we can build with these. Right, and I'm thinking of something like soil-like that I could build. So maybe the first example, it's basically just a tower with a hole in it. It could be a macropore in a soil, very simple. But the nice thing now is that I can do some calculations on this structure. So I can calculate the porosity of this, how much pores do I have of the total volume, and I can also calculate a transport function on it. So now I'm focusing, of course, on a very narrow aspect of soil function. But I can calculate what is called the diffusivity coefficient that tells me how fast basically I could move a gas from the top to the bottom of that sample if I apply a concentration gradient, right? So you get some numbers here. I could do a second example. It's very similar, but now it's oriented in a different way. So you see, these two examples, they have the same porosity, but they have a different function. Now I could not transport a gas in a vertical direction anymore. And I could do a third example. I will stop here. So I make it a bit more exciting. I take out some bricks from the side and put them on the top. I construct a little bit a more complicated pore space. But now I have increased the porosity, and I have increased the gas diffusivity coefficient, and I'm able to transport a gas in all three directions now, which is maybe good. So you can see just from an assembly of Lego bricks, I can produce different structures, and these structures have different functions. We can also learn that if I only have knowledge on the building blocks, I can not make any conclusions on how this thing works. So now, of course, the question is, what is now the optimum soil structure? I'm not giving you an answer, or I give you an answer from a scientist. It depends. So, of course, if I want to play football, as one of my sons here, I maybe want to have a different function of the soil than if I would like to produce food. I don't know too much about wine growing, but I think if you want to have a good wine, the plant should suffer a little bit. So what is good for wine growing may not be good for growing wheat, for example. Now, for agricultural production, we have a bit of a problem or a conflict that on the one side we want to make the soil very fluffy and porous so that roots can grow nicely. And on the other side, we also need to drive on that soil, and we want to protect the soil against wind and water erosion. So this is my other son here. Right. There is another important property which complicates things a little bit for us, and this is that soil structure is dynamic. I very much like this drawing, and I'm very happy that Inge Håkansson, he is among us today. So this is 50 years old, still true, and we still don't understand it. So what you can see if we go through a yearly cycle, that we have some soil management impacts that greatly affect the structure. I'm thinking of tillage, where we fragment the soil, where we loosen the soil, and I'm thinking of soil compaction when we drive on the soil, when we press the whole thing together again. But then in between these things, or these operations, we have maybe a plant growing, so roots grow, and while by growing, they change the structure of the soil. We have animals in the soil, they move around, they maybe excrete some substances that change the surfaces. So there is a whole kind of a biological engine in the soil that is working all the time and changing the structure of the soil all the time. Let's look a little bit at the time scales of dynamics, and I take the example of compaction. So what we see on this side here is how long it takes to compact the soil. And that's a couple of seconds, maybe. So we can measure the stress in the soil, we can measure how the soil moves up and down, and in this case we could measure that there was kind of a permanent deformation after this passage of the vehicle, leading to compaction. Now what we can see on this side is the effects of that if we deform the soil. You see the same two nice examples again, with the bluish thing being the pores of an uncompacted soil, let's say, and this one is compacted. And you see a certain function of it. So now in this case, it's how I could push air through the sample. And of course, here it goes a bit better than here. Now, what's very important with this figure is this number here. So these are samples that we took 14 years after that soil had been compacted. So we went to a spot where we knew the soil was compacted 14 years ago. We took our samples, and what we can see here is that we still see effects of soil compaction. So that's why I've put a question mark here. You can see that this soil is not fully recovered after 15 or 14 years. I could show you another example from a similar experiment in Finland, where we were about 30 years after the compaction, and still we can see effects of compaction on soil functions. So basically it takes a second to compact the soil, it takes a generation to recover it. So we're putting the soil under stress. So not only ourselves, we get stressed from time to time, but also the soil. And this is just a bit a historical perspective of how much stress we put on the soil. And so you see here a tractor from 80 years ago. It weighs about 3 tons, and one from today, which has 16 tons. So what does it do to the soil now? We have done measurements where we measured the stress, and in this case we have measured at 2 depths. One is close to the surface, and one is a bit deeper in the soil. And what I can see now is that the stress close to the surface has not increased very much, but the stress in the subsoil, it has increased tremendously. And why is that? Well, while we have increased the weight of machinery, we also have today much better tires, we have larger and better tracks. So these two almost balance each other out, we could say. So this stress doesn't increase very much. But if we go to the subsoil, what we see there is basically the weight of the machinery. So this increase from 3 tons to 16 tons makes an increase in the subsoil stress. So today, we're putting much more stress on the soil, and particularly at depths where we cannot do tillage. Now, the other soil management operation that kind of has a huge impact on the structure of the soil is tillage. And it's a bit the same there, that it takes just a few seconds to till the soil, or, I mean, a certain point will be tilled and fragmented almost instantly, while the effects on how the whole soil profile would work and develop in terms of structure, it maybe takes years to decades to adapt to a new tillage system. So these are results from a long-term tillage experiment close to Bern in Switzerland. What you see here is the soil profiles in terms of density, red in conventional tillage and blue no-till, and soil organic carbon concentration. So you see it's largely different due to the tillage system that we apply. And what we can do now is also we could measure some physical functions. Again, I measured the relative gas diffusivity. The numbers are not so important. This shows how this increases as a function of drying. But what I want to point out here is if we look at the relations between the two systems, we see one relation in the topsoil, and this is reversed in the subsoil. So now we could ask plants, of course, which system do they like better? We did that, well, not directly because they cannot answer, but we looked at crop yields, for example, and we can see that certain crops, they prefer one system or they yield better in one system, while other crops maybe yield better in another system. So it also shows that we could probably adapt better our crop rotations and maybe even varieties to the tillage system. So now, just for the fun of it, how much soil do we move around by tillage? We can do it per hectare. So then we move around maybe 3,000 tons per hectare and year. How much is that for the whole of Sweden per year? Any ideas? So we have about 2.5 million hectares of arable land. And if I make some assumptions and calculations, I end up with billions of tons of soil that we move around by tillage every year. It's an enormous number, so I almost think I made something wrong, but you can tell me afterwards where I made a mistake. So if I took all this soil that we move around and put it on a football field, that's about 100 by 100 meters, it would pile up to a tower of something like 300 kilometers height. Just reflect a little bit about that. Now we could, for example, relate that to how much soil or rock do we move around when we build tunnels. Well, maybe not in Sweden, but in Switzerland we like to build tunnels. So recently we opened a long railway tunnel through the Alps. It's 57 kilometers long. It has a tunnel is maybe 10 meters in diameter. So, and I think there are 2 of these. So that's maybe 150 square meters times 57 kilometers. So it's much, much less. And it also took us, I think, 10 years to do this. So it's much, much less than what we do by tillage every year. I'm not saying we shouldn't do tillage at all, but it's maybe nice to reflect sometimes a little bit of how much energy we put into this every year. And we could maybe ask ourselves whether we could use the biology and the nature that we have in the soil to do maybe part of that job. For example, earthworms, they can move around incredibly amounts of soil every year, so it passes through their gut. We have other animals that can make fantastic structures into the soil. For example, we have wild bees that nest in the ground, and they can, in fact, decompact the soil because they bring the soil up to the surface, and they can move around. Maybe here it was 27 tons per hectare, and they do that within quite a short time. Now, of course, I cannot just put my plow into the garage and take out the wild bees and they will do the job. Of course, I know that. But I think if we knew a little bit better what different organisms can do, if we can quantify what they can do, we can maybe potentially use them better and trigger their activity somehow. So, as a summary, we like to think that soil structure is very important, controls many, many functions and services. It's a dynamic property, and we're talking about time scales between seconds and generations. We put more and more stress on the soil, so compaction is already a problem, but is aggravating. Tillage is, of course, fantastic to quickly change the soil structure, but we also put a lot of energy into it. There are natural processes that drive soil structure dynamics, but to quantify that, that's really the challenge. But if we had a better understanding of this, we could perhaps better use this soil biological engine to help us manage our soils. I would like to thank a few people here, basically all my collaborators. I'm taking a bit of risk because I name a few of them, and I'm sure I have forgotten somebody, so my apologies for that. But I list a few names with whom I have collaborated the most, and a few names that have inspired me the most. I would like to thank our group of soil mechanics and soil management for support and for creating a good working atmosphere. I would like to acknowledge funding agencies, and I would like to thank you. I'm looking forward to many years of collaborations with many of you. Thanks for listening. Thank you.